Yeah, it was awesome actually. Um, it was one of those glamorous, ritzy things I've ever seen. And at the same token, it was also like one of those like intimate because it was like there was way less people than I was originally told were going to be there. So like there was like 100. Um, but at the same token, it was an Arab. They're a Lebanese family, Lebanon, they're Arab. So there very much is that sense of hospitality is part of it and things like that. What's weird is I grew up with this guy. We started hanging around when I was like 5. He was 4. So like we've known each other for like forever. And I never thought of him as being Lebanese. Like he was just who he was. And it's like it wasn't like they had all this like Middle Eastern stuff in their house, things like that. I mean, they did have a lot of like Oriental carpets, but that's like the extent of it. So never really thought about like the fact that it was different like ethnicity and things like that. And then they did this traditional Lafontaine dance at the thing. And so I started seeing this Mitra out there, and she's doing like this really elaborate dance, these hand gestures, things like that. And it was like, dude. Where did this come from? So it was awesome, Chicago's a great town. If you've never been there. But so we're starting a new section today. Pretty certain we did. Did we finish the last section? Yeah. Yes, partition, Poland, that's the last thing, so we're good. Solid. No. Yeah, wait, yes, it is chapter 5. Chapter 5, section 5. So, like I said, some of the later chapters start getting like 5 sections, but just 3. Alright, so here's the deal with this week. Basically, I want to cover like 2 sections, and then the rest of the week I want to spend kind of prepping for the end of the quarter. Because as you guys know, the end of the quarter is not this Friday, but next Friday. True story, it's October 10th. So basically that means anything that needs to be turned in needs to be done by then. Now I'm a little bit slow on some of the grading, I know. So I'm going to spend a lot of time trying to catch up with that. And I should be caught up by tomorrow. I should be in good shape. So that means that everything else will be back. So my thinking is, we take 2 days to talk about England and Parliament and government and stuff like that. And then Wednesday, I'm going to have you guys correct the mistakes you made on the previous tests. And I will give you back half credit for those corrections. So it's just like a quiz. You're going to be in class, so you don't have to worry about taking them home or anything like that. Just turn in your done. So you might want to remember to bring your answer sheet so you don't have to answer all the questions. But basically the way it goes is like this. I know what your grade is. But unless I have the answer sheet in front of me telling me, hey, you missed like 1, 16, 32, whatever, I'm not going to know which questions you got wrong. So basically, you have to do all of the questions, and that's a lot of work that you really shouldn't have to do. So basically, what I'm saying is, bring your answer sheets and you'll be solid, okay? And I'll give you guys the test, so you don't have to worry about that part. I'll get into it. As far as Friday, I'm actually going to have you guys watch a video, because normally we'd be having a quiz this week. However, I'm pushing things back so we have a little bit less time. We're going to have one more test by the end of the quarter, but that's going to be next week. It's going to be on that Friday, so we got some time, purposely spreading it out. So we're not going to have a quiz or a test this week. Instead, I'm going to have you guys watch an episode of a TV show that goes into the Cosmos. It's called Cosmos, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Yes, it is. And you guys are going to watch one particular episode because we're going to be talking about a new era this week called the Enlightenment. It's a new area of change. It's the birth of the scientific era. In fact, I'm actually skipping section 1 of the next chapter because we've already started to cover that with some of the guys, like Sir Isaac Newton and folks like that. But it goes into the history of what these guys came up with was important. Because, like they say, what's so important about the theory of gravity? Neil deGrasse Tyson does an excellent job explaining why that matters and how it affects us and things like that. So it's a pretty cool program. We're going to watch that. We're going to do some stuff with it. And then we kind of ease into the next section. So all should be well in how things work out. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start the Triumph of Parliament in England. So I should see no homework on your all's desk. It should be notebooks from this point on. And I went ahead and took the liberty of doing like we've been doing, putting over on the whiteboard, the breaking apart and synthesizing all the information that is in the notes for you, and we're going to continue to do that. I even wrote bigger because some folks are like, Mr. Mudd, I cannot read what you're writing. It's like, that's fair enough. So today we're talking about Parliament. Can someone tell me what the word Parliament, what does that mean? How would you define a Parliament? It's government, sure. What type of government? Well, we can start using all kinds of descriptive words like, is a bicameral legislature, which, what does that mean? Does anyone know bicameral legislature? What does bi mean? Two-house legislature. Okay, fair enough. Do we have two houses in our legislative branch? Yes, we do. What are our two branches? We have the House of Representatives and the Senate. Sure, fantastic. That is a width. That is shorthand. I've explained it already. It's just a W with a hook. So it is. And then you can put an O down into the house. So it's just a way of cutting down words. Letters actually that job. Anyways, so how do we determine how many seats in the Senate and the House of Representatives that every state gets in our federal government? Well, how many seats does every state have in the Senate? That's the easy one. Everybody has two. Doesn't matter how big you are or little you are, everybody has two. What determines the number of seats in the House of Representatives? Yeah, well, that's the government stuff like her. Yeah, your population does. It's a great compromise because, again, both have their advantages. On one hand, it isn't fair for a state that has a lot of people to be able to impose its will irrevocably on the rest of the American people. Yet at the same time, it's a little bit fair because it's the majority rule. That's kind of what a democracy is, isn't it? So how do we make a decision? We compromise. We have both. That's where the system comes from. So a parliament is also a bicameral legislature. However, it works a little bit differently. So for instance, you have two houses, the House of Lords and the House of Commons, or House of Commerce. Basically, one house is solely divided for the interests of the nobility. The other house is the sole interest of everyone else. The idea being that the Parliament acts as an advisory body to the monarch. The king has all decisions. Now, they can do whatever they want, but how do they know what the right thing is to do? No one comes out of the womb going like, right, I know how to drive a semi. How do you learn to do everything? Observation, through teaching, through parents or friends or coworkers or whatever. We have all these different sources of information to help us make the correct decisions. Think about you guys out there who are deciding on where you're going to go to school here in another 2 years. How do you, I know, right? Pretty loud, isn't it? How are you going to make that decision? Think about where you're getting advice from, We all need advice. Sometimes it's unsolicited and sometimes it's not wise advice, but it helps us to make decisions, yeah? So in the case of a monarch who has lived their entire lives pampered and taking care of things, they have no understanding of what the commoner's life is like. So they need someone to tell them, this is the problem they're dealing with, sire. So that's what Parliament is supposed to do. Now the problem is you have two main classes in society, those that are noble and those that are not. So each class gets some representatives to sort of advise the king on what interests them. So it's fair, right? In theory, except the problem is the nobles have all the wealth and power, and they use that wealth and power to influence the king. If the king does something that pisses off the commoners, they're not exactly able to raise armies and overthrow him, are they? Well, eventually they are, in fact, and that's what we're going to be talking today. We're talking about the English Civil War that's going to break up because of this uneven influence that the nobles have with the king, and how the commoners are going to be upset about this, and they're going to rise in revolution and change the whole system. And so, we look at a few important concepts. First, we're starting with two different dynasties in England. The first is the Tudor dynasty. That would include individuals like King Henry VIII, Mary Tudor, Elizabeth I. All these folks are in the same royal family, the Tudors, and they are going to be, as a general rule, very good in dealing with Parliament. You see, Parliament is all about politics. And as we've already established, there's some very powerful people in the Parliament. And so these people are always going to be trying to increase their own power and wealth and prestige at the expense of their rivals, including sometimes the king himself. So what is a king or queen to do in order to keep the parliamentary forces from overthrowing them? Well, the best solution is to pit rivals within the parliament against each other. So you balance everything out. The Tudors are going to be really good at this. For instance, the main divide in Parliament after the Protestant Reformation in England is going to be between the Protestants and the Catholics. Now, Henry is excellent at playing these two forces against each other. Both are convinced that King Henry is just a matter of a few steps away from declaring that either Protestantism is banned and no longer acceptable in England, or that he's going to fully get rid of Catholicism and make the whole country Protestant. Two wildly different points of view, and both are convinced that they can convince the king to go their way. So he's really good at kind of, leading them on, essentially. He's a tease, Elizabeth is likewise going to be very good at this. However, they both act as absolute monarchs as well. They still have all the power, but they listen to their subjects. The parliament is going to say, hey, we want this to happen, and even if they say, we can't make that happen, Elizabeth is good enough to make it seem like they're having an input. You take away a people's input from their government, feel they have no say, feel they have no choice, then there's a revolution. That's when people rebel. People get all up in arms that, the reason the American Revolution happened was because people were mad about taxes on sugar. That's part of it. If you tax someone's ability to make money, yeah, they're going to be pissed. But take away their ability to change the government, that's what causes people to be upset. There's that whole issue of there's no taxation without representation. Well, that's kind of two things, but we forget that. So anywho, what's happening here is she's at least getting the illusion of listening. And that's just as important as actually listening. I will say Elizabeth did do a lot of wonderful things as well, especially given that in between Henry and Elizabeth, we actually have two other monarchs. First of all, Henry's son, who died very young, so he's kind of not really noteworthy because he was so young when he took the throne even, he really didn't do that much. Nothing of worldly importance. And then secondly, Mary Tudor, who took the throne afterwards, was the eldest daughter. She was the daughter of Henry and Catherine of Aragon, very, very Catholic. And so she starts pushing hard against the Protestants, trying to bring it back into the Catholic fold. And so she uses torture and intimidation and executions as a way of sort of bringing everyone back into the fold. Because of that, she got the nickname Bloody Mary. So she's sort of this, infamous character in English history. So when Elizabeth comes back and sort of reforms and says, everybody chill out about religion, it's kind of a breath of fresh air, as well as many other things she does in terms of making England to its golden age. So needless to say, and actually that's debatable, I would argue that under Elizabeth it wasn't the golden age in any shape or form. That's going to come later, but we'll talk about that when we get into it. But they understand the worth of keeping people involved, which is, I think, an incredibly important concept a lot of Americans are missing. Case in point. When President Obama became President of the United States, there were record turnouts for the number of voters who participated in the electoral process. Record numbers. Haven't seen this for over 100 years. Do you guys know how many people turned out to vote? What percentage of voters in the United States turned out in record high numbers to vote? It's about 51%. So a little more than half. And that's like the most people have turned out in 100 years. Half of the population does not vote, even though they can. And yet, how often do we hear in the news, well, this government just doesn't do what we want it to do. I don't agree with anything they do. The government's all the same anyways. Everyone, they're all corrupted. You hear stuff like this. You hear how bad the government is. Well, who put them in office? We did. Because even if you don't vote, you're still voting. By taking your vote out, you are increasing percentage-wise the influence of everyone who does vote. Or to put it another way, what population of the United States are women?
99.
Not quite that high.
51.
A little bit higher. About 55, 56, yeah. So basically, if we go by the laws of, majority rule, then if every woman in this country decided to vote for the same candidate, they would pick the president every single time. And yet they don't. Women traditionally don't turn out to vote as often as men. There's a reason why if you get to government, Mr. House or Mr. Wadsworth is going to hit on the head. Get out and vote. Get out and vote. Because that is the only way you will have a direct say in the government. Oh, and by the way, women have been fighting for the right to vote for hundreds of years. Women died so that they could vote. It's kind of important. And the reasons I generally hear why I'm not going to vote, how come? One, I don't know anything about the candidates. Two, they're all the same anyways. And three, it doesn't really matter. My vote is insignificant, one of millions in the country. My one vote won't matter. Now let's address all these for just a second. First of all, that they're all basically the same. Well, if that's true, then why is there such disagreement in the government? Why is there such polarization? Why doesn't every bill proposed by the Senate get passed? Because they're different. They're representing different groups, different interest groups. And it's not necessarily what you want. Vote for candidates who back what you want to have happen, and the government will change. Guys, every politician wants to get reelected. That's kind of what they're there to do. And the way they do that is by pleasing the people who vote for them. If they don't get reelected. It's as simple as that. So only vote for people who are interested in getting into that. And if nothing else, if you lose every single time, you are participating in the process. I realize is maybe not the best thing, because that kind of gets to the third point. My vote really doesn't matter. Again, as an individual, you're right. The problem is 50%, a little bit less than in some cases, most of the time more than that, of the entire population of the United States says the same thing. If they turned out and voted, they could choose who was president, but they don't. So don't be that guy. Same difference.
Hey.
Third point, or second point really, but getting to the third point here, is I don't know anything about the topics. And that actually is somewhat understandable, except for the fact we live in the best age ever in history to have access to information. There is a website that is a not-for-profit organization called Project Vote Smart. All that they do is collect information on candidates being put into various elections around the country. And what they do is they tend to divide it into 10 different major topics at the time, such as abortion or, back at the war on terror, they had a question of education, transportation. These big points things come down to this is a major issue in the world. What do they think about it? And then they rate them on a scale depending on whether they were flat out, I believe in this, or whether they kind of alluded to what they thought or they didn't answer the question. It's called the political bravery test. Because you notice that politicians don't like to say anything one way or the other when it comes to a really, really hot button issue topic. Because if they say, I am pro whatever, then the people that are against that viewpoint are not going to vote for them in a million years. See what I'm saying? So they don't want to do that. They just want to kind of not really answer the questions. So that's the political bravery test. In fact, when it comes to election time, you can actually take a personality test where it will say, okay, how do you feel about this topic? Are you pro-life? Are you pro-choice? And then it will ask you, rate this attitude, like how important is this issue to you? 1 from 5. 5 being very important, to 1 being adds kind of importance. And then it will recommend candidates to you based upon your decisions. Now, it's not like, because you might be like, well, that's kind of shifty. It's telling me how to vote. Yes, but it's based upon the facts you input. So it's really kind of interesting to see how that works out. Anyways, the point is, none of those are really valid reasons to not vote. The only reason I've ever seen valid to not vote is I cannot, because of age or other circumstances. And that's really it. My cousin, who was in Afghanistan, and beat through the mail, but he didn't. That's kind of a lot harder than going down to the corner. People say, well, I'm busy, things like that. Guys are open all night. They're open until 10 a.m., 10 p.m., things like that. In fact, some of them have gotten clever. For instance, the place I know, they offer snacks. It's in a church, and they actually take up collections of snackies, and they give them the snacks, so you come and vote, get yourself some orange juice, or they have some Doritos and things. I took my daughter last time I went and voted, and she's like, well, can she have a sucker? Of course she can have a sucker. No. We'll come down. But this is an important thing, And the reason I'm hitting on this so hard is, one, because elections are coming up. It's time to think about these sort of things. The other thing is that the democratic process relies on this. And we're going to see time and time again people fighting for this right historically who are denied this right of participating in their government. And they're going to fight and sometimes die for this right. And yet, so many of us don't take advantage of it. You know what I mean? Apathy is the greatest enemy of democracy. But I digress. So let's talk what happened when Elizabeth got the crown. She never married. She never wanted to give someone else that kind of power over her. And so she had no heir. Now, it's not to say she didn't have relationships. Boy, howdy, did she have relationships. Rumor has it that she was intimately involved with at least 3 other individuals, including Sir Walter Raleigh. So it wasn't that she was inhuman and didn't want relationship, but rather that she didn't want to give up any of the power. She was an absolute monarch, so this is kind of how she did things. Because that she had no children. So this meant there was no heir, and the Tudor dynasty was kaput. So it went to their nearest cousins, the Stuarts, who were actually the ruling family in Scotland at the time. And this is going to begin a whole new era of English history. Now, whereas the Tudors are very good with Parliament, the Stuarts are bad with Parliament. They cannot really agree on anything. Part of the problem has to do with this identity crisis. You look at France, you look at Russia, you look at Spain. The fad in Europe is absolute monarchy. You don't have to answer to anybody. So the English crown is like, yeah, that's what we want to do. The problem is, there's already a parliament. You see, years and years ago, they signed that document, Magna Carta, which limited the power of the monarch. So you can't just like throw that out, wad it in a piece of paper, and chuck it out a window. You are limited in what you can and cannot do, at least in theory. The king decides he's just going to do what he wants. And really, he likes to spend a lot of money. That would be James I, the first Stuart king of England. And his intent is to have a monarchy that's just like France. We're going to have big parties and pageants. We're all going to fight wars. We're going to go out and spread the Church of England. We're going to suppress the Calvinism in Scotland. We're going to get rid of the Protestant influences. And everyone's going to be the same. And it really doesn't work so well. James's contribution, his main contribution, is actually the King James Bible, which was commissioned in English to try to sort of promote this idea of Church of England. But it doesn't. Some people reject it, some people acknowledge it. It's an important document regardless. However, his wars and his parties are too expensive, and he cannot raise taxes on his own. Legally, that right rests solely with the Parliament. Well, he begins asking for more and more money, and just like a parent who's had enough, the Parliament cuts him off. He can't have any more money. And so James dissolves the Parliament, December 31st, 1610. Now, Parliament, they didn't necessarily think he was going to go that far. So this was like a big deal. By getting rid of Parliament, he limits their power and influence and things like that, and declares himself, I'm an absolute monarch. So this is going to really kind of unnerve the parliamentarians, the folks who were part of the Parliament. That's going to kind of lead on to problems later on. But suffice it to say, James's need to spend money is what starts driving a wedge between the Parliament and the monarch. Who leads? Okay. Let's go on to the next slide then. So in 1625, Charles becomes the next king of England. And he also wants to be an absolute monarch. And his biggest problem, the thing that people are going to hate him the most for, is imprisoning political enemies. It's a big no-no. First of all, what is prison? What's the purpose of prison? It's a question we've been asking for centuries. What's the purpose of it? What's your thoughts? Yeah. Okay, so it's a punishment. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so to remove you from the population. Sure. It's that too. Anything else? Well, there's actually kind of two thoughts to this. On one hand, you're right. It's a punishment. You know, we're taking away rights and freedoms. But the question comes as to why. Well, punishment is sort of an interesting question because, like, if your parents punish you, what's the purpose of that punishment? It corrects your behavior, sure. So we want to reform behavior, right? You know, for instance, if you flush the goldfish down the toilet bowl, I don't know why you would do that. You're punished for it, things like that. It's don't flush the fish down the toilet bowl. It's not Finding Nemo. You know, they're not going to go out to sea and have an adventure with a turtle. They don't do that. So it's the correct behavior, yes? Well, prison's kind of the same thing, right? We want to reform criminals so that they don't keep committing crimes. However, there's also this issue of revenge. You see, we don't like to admit, because revenge is a negative thing. Revenge is never good. Revenge never actually benefits anybody. It's just about making ourselves feel better about a situation. There is no crime that we could say that can be done and revenge will fix it. You know, revenge is the basis of the first laws. You know, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. It's kind of where the idea comes from. And the problem is, the more grievous the crime, the higher the revenge becomes. You know, for instance, you take a life. Well, they kill you instead, right? That's revenge. Is that justice? We can have all kinds of debates about justice, what it is and what it means. But we're going to save an argument right now. We're just going to kind of come back to the main idea. Is that, generally speaking, the crime and the punishment have to match. You know what I mean? That's the point of justice, is we do not exceed a punishment beyond what the crime dictates. Now, we as a society have to make that decision, so that's why it's such a muddled and muddy question. But that's the idea, is that the crime fits the punishment. So, putting somebody in a prison, locking them away from the rest of society, what punishments deserve that? This is where law comes in. This is what we decide upon things. The king would put people in prison because they annoyed him, or because they spoke out against him. That is hard in some cases, I feel, for us to fathom. Imagine living in a society where if you were overheard saying the wrong thing, you went to prison. Some cases you would just disappear. No one would never be seen again. No one would know what happened to you. There have been many, and are many civilizations like this, where you as an individual are irrelevant. Your rights and needs and wants are totally insignificant. The state is what matters. Nothing else matters. This is the basis of the type of society we're going to see in democracy. It's this idea that the individual matters more than the state. The individual's needs, wants, and feelings is more important, up to a certain point, which we'll get to that later. But the idea that this is going to violate is called habeas corpus, Latin for of the body. You cannot arrest somebody just because they annoy you, just because you want to. There has to be a reason. In fact, if you've ever been arrested, the police read to you a set of your rights. The right to remain silent. Anything you can say will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney, etc., etc. You're watching NCIS or the Miranda rights. Basic rights, in particular, you cannot be imprisoned without being charged with something. There is a limit to how long the police can hold you for questioning. It depends on the state. I've heard I think some places like 3 days, some places 24 hours. But it's the same idea. It's the writ of habeas corpus. It's a fundamental law in the United States. I don't know Kentucky State. I live in Indiana, so.
What?
Yeah. I guess. Whatever. So anyways, Charles does all these things that really annoy the parliamentarians, and so he actually has to resummon Parliament in 1628 for the purpose of raising taxes. See, Parliament had been restored long ago, after James I's disbanding of them. But this meant that they were very weary. So they said, okay, we are going to help you, but you have to sign the document called the Petition of Rights, which basically meant that Parliament cannot be disbanded. You can't just get rid of us. Furthermore, you cannot raise taxes without our permission, and you cannot arrest people and throw in prison without first charging them with a crime and habeas corpus. So Charles signed this, but nevertheless, he just ignored and did whatever he wanted. So this made him a lot of enemies. They saw that he wasn't good as his word. He wasn't going to work with the parliamentarians. So when he tried to issue the Anglican Prayer Book in Scotland in 1637, the Calvinists rebelled, and so he called on Parliament again in order to suppress the rebellion to raise funding. This is going to cause a showdown between him and the Parliament and who is going to budge first. This showdown spins out of control into a civil war that is going to be fought between two different powers. I like to call it the War of the Hats, because each side took their name off of a particular faction. Yes, the two sides they're going to face down are the Roundheads and the Cavaliers. Roundheads. Right? To put that in perspective, all right, so the Cavaliers was a type of hat that, if you've ever seen the Three Musketeers or Puss in Boots from Shrek, it's like a round hat that has one side cocked up with a feather coming off the side. You know what I'm talking about? If not, I'll show you a picture in a minute. The round hat was actually something that was more like a commoner's hat. It was used by soldiers, it was used by peasants, pretty much everybody. That hat is going to be used as sort of a symbol. It's an army of the everyday person. And these two groups are going to clash, and they're going to have very wildly disparaging views of each other. But that we will get to tomorrow. Okay? Until then.